I made this video to show how to change the water pump on a Camry Hybrid. This here is a 2008 Camry Hybrid. It has 68,000 miles on it, and I learned recently that the water pump had gone bad. The way to tell that you have a bad water pump is that the coolant on the Camry, at least mine when it came new, was it's kind of like this pinkish reddish looking coolant. It's probably hard to tell from here. But the coolant itself, it started leaking out of the water pump right in this area, basically where my hand is, right around here. And if you look down there with a flashlight, obviously with the car not running, you might see some dried crusting coolant, and if you see that, then your water pump is leaking. And that's exactly what happened to mine. From what I've read on the internet, it's not uncommon for that to happen. So what I did is I had the car at the dealership actually when they detected it, and I didn't have time for them to work on it. So, when I got the car home, I just, being naturally curious, I started looking at it myself. And as I've looked at it, what I've determined is it's actually very easy to change the water pump on this car. It's probably easier than a lot of other cars. So what the dealer wanted was $522 to do the work. What I've done is I bought a new water pump. That's the old one right there. But I bought a new water pump. I got a Napa that you can see in that box right there. That was about $63. That's considered a premium water pump with a lifetime warranty. Compare that to the Toyota with, I think it was $160 or something like that. And obviously, if that water pump was so great, it wouldn't have failed in the first place. New coolant, the pink kind of long life coolant, I got that as well, since obviously you have to drain it to change the water pump. A couple other little things. I got some Permatex, some gasket maker right there, and I bought a new accessory belt. Some tools that you'll need in order to do the work, besides the water, the new parts. I needed a little piece of sandpaper just to clean up the old gasket off of the block where the water pump had squeezed against it. So I used a very, very fine grain. It's like 150 or maybe a little bit more than that. So just be real gentle. You don't want to sand away the block, obviously, but you don't want any of the old sealer to stay there. And I used a somewhat dull chisel in order to scrape off things. Once again, being careful not to damage the block. From a tool standpoint, I used this chain wrench here. There's a pulley. The water pump has a pulley that attaches to it. It's kind of like a big black dome that kind of slides over this, bolted on with 4 bolts. Well, obviously this is going to spin, right? And if you're trying to undo the bolts and it's spinning, that's a problem. So what I did is I wrapped some tape around the pulley, which is now on the car, but the black pulley, I wrapped some tape around it, squeezed it with this chain wrench, and then I could keep it from turning while I used wrenches on the various bolts. If I had a strap, what I did is I put some tape on the pulley to protect it from getting scratched. If you had like a rubber strap or something like that, a similar kind of tool but with a rubber strap, it might be a little bit easier and save you some time, because then I had to peel all the tape off and it kind of got squeezed, and it just took longer than I would have liked. But other than that, you'll just need some normal sockets. 10 millimeter, you'll use a 10 millimeter metric socket a lot. You'll use a 12 some, and then a 14 just a little bit. Other than that, tool-wise, you don't really need very much. I think, knowing what I know now, I could probably change this water pump in about an hour. First thing you do is you take off this, first thing you do is you drain the coolant. So down inside the engine, down at the lower part of the radiator, there's like a little paddle. It feels like it's kind of vertical, and you just twist it, counterclockwise, like you're unscrewing anything. You don't have to back it out all the way. Just back it out, 3 turns, something like that, and the coolant will just start draining directly down. And nicely, there's a little cut in the bodywork down there, so it can drain right into a container, nice and easy. You don't have to jack up the car or do anything. So it was very, very simple. From there, I took off this accessory cover that's 10 millimeter, and then I took from that point, here's the belt right here. You can probably see some of the lettering on it. There's the accessory belt, which drives the water pump. What I did is, once I took that off, I was able to get a wrench on this little piece of this little bit of metal that's sticking out here. And basically what I did is, putting the wrench here, I latched it on and just pushed it up like that. That compressed the idler, and I was able to get the belt off. So it was very, very easy. Then from there, once I had the belt off, I took this idler off. There's a bolt here at the top, and then there's another one at the bottom. I think they're 12 millimeter bolts. No, I'm sorry. This one's 14 millimeter here, and that one's 12 down there. So there's two holding the idler on. That was actually kind of difficult. The idler up here where it's machined, touching the block, it's very, very tight. So, you know, you kind of got to like wiggle it off, and it was a little difficult. I also undid this this harness here where it was holding on to the idler because I didn't want to undo anything electrical. I didn't want to mess with that. So I just undid that and pulled the idler out of the way. It took me a lot longer to get the idler back on, but on the plus side, it gave me a lot of access to actually get to the water pump, which is literally right below, you know, below into the back of the idler. So once you get the shield off, get the idler off, undo the belt, then you have the pulley itself. As I mentioned, I put tape around the pulley. I used the chain wrench to keep the pulley from spinning, 12 millimeter, and I just undid it. I didn't use a socket actually on that. There might not be enough room from the side, so I used a 12 millimeter wrench. Undid all 4 bolts, you know, just held it, undid them, took it off. From there, you can take the water pump off itself. The water pump is 10 millimeter bolts. It's being threaded into aluminum, so they're not really torqued down very tight, so be very careful when you're putting them back on that you do not tighten them too much because, you know, you could strip the threads in the aluminum block, and, you know, that would be a real mess because, you know, it would take a lot of effort to fix that, and, you know, nobody wants to do that. So, you know, when you tighten them back on, you know, don't go crazy. Just, you know, tighten them a little bit. The water pump itself, you know, once I took it off, a lot of coolant fell out, unsurprisingly. Once I took the water pump off, undid the bolts. There's 6 bolts that go around it. The one complicating aspect was at the bottom here in this little hole, there's an electric wire, a crank sensor that comes down from the top of the engine because the crankshaft pulley is right down here. This is like a little plastic clip that holds the crank sensor as it heads down there. So I wanted to be really careful as I pulled that off. You know, I didn't want to really yank on it and potentially damage the crank sensor or anything like that. I didn't unhook the crank sensor. I left it hooked up where it is below and where it is at the top. I just undid it along here. So I think this bolt and this bolt were also holding the crank sensor wire down as it threaded its way there. So this last mechanical little plastic clip, I just pushed it out, and I just spent a lot of time doing that because I didn't want to, like I said, damage the crank sensor. But once you get that done, and then you get the water pump off, it's really not very hard. The water pump, you know, the new one looks similar to this one. My new water pump came with a gasket. I talked to the guys at the auto shop, and they said, you know, use the gasket. So I put the gasket on the engine. Once I cleaned it, you know, the block itself, it's nice and clean, you know, and, you know, so there's no old gasket there at all. I kind of scraped gently, used the sandpaper for any areas that looked like there was a little bit left. Like I said, real gentle. You know, it didn't take long, maybe 15 minutes just to make sure it was completely clean. Dried it with a rag. And then the new water pump, maybe you can see this groove right here. I filled it with the Permatex, put the gasket on the engine, you know, put this on. According to the directions, you're supposed to, excuse me, tighten the water pump just a little bit. They say finger tight. You can't really get your fingers on it very well sometimes to do it finger tight. But, you know, I used the ratchet, but I didn't go crazy. I just tightened it a little bit. And the idea is that the Permatex, give it like an hour to dry, and then as you squeeze it harder, you know, since it's firmer, it will seal better. So that's exactly how I did it. I put the Permatex all around in this groove, and also around the bolt holes themselves. I don't know if that's strictly necessary because in this case they're all outside of the groove, and in theory they're not going to leak, but what the heck, I only have one little tube of the stuff and I'm going to throw it away anyway. So I just kind of filled the entire gap, not crazy, but, you know, filled it, you know, generously around it. So, and it squeezed out nicely when I put it on. So then I went and waited an hour, came back with a 10 millimeter, just tightened them a little bit more. Like I said, you know, be gentle. Do not go crazy tightening those. You do not want to strip the threads in the aluminum block. That would be a very bad thing. And then, you know, then it's just basically putting it back together. Using the chain, you know, hold the crank pulley, I'm sorry, the water pump pulley from spinning. Tighten it with a 12 millimeter wrench, not a socket actually. And then from there, you put the idler back on. I think it probably took me, you know, well, elapsed time when you throw in the hour for the Permatex and the other stuff, you know, probably 3-4 hours or something like that. But I think, you know, if you were working steady and you know, you had the right tools and everything set up, I think you could probably do it in an hour, you know, other than waiting for the Permatex to dry. So you can do it pretty quick, and I think it's very doable by a home user, and I hope this new water pump lasts. So I guess that's it. If you have any questions, good luck.